Welcome to this episode of Phenomenoumena with our guest, security researcher at Google, James Forshaw. James, we've been friends for a long time, and I was hoping that we were going to meet again here in Tokyo this year, but all kinds of things got in the way of that, obviously. And so here we are in 3 different time zones to chat online, and at least that is a kind of cool substitute.
That's definitely the theory. Yeah, it's been one of those years, right? It's not something which anyone had really expected, but it is what it is. And so thank God for the world of the internet that we can meet virtually.
Yeah, right. We have to thank the technology, which I guess is going to be one of the themes of this episode.
Yep.
So, Ray, did you want to ask something to start off, or?
Right. Well, okay. So I was watching some of your videos on YouTube, and I want to start off with a very basic question.
Mm-hmm.
What is a sandbox?
So you remember when you were a child and you were playing in the park and there was some mud in the at the side of the pavement, and you obviously decided to play in that, and the idea is you sort of get bogged down and it's impossible to get out of. Now apply that to computers, and what it really means is you have say for example, a web browser. Your web browser is connecting to all manner of shady sites. Not that I want to necessarily assume what shady sites you're likely to go to. But let's say that this site hasn't your best interest at heart, and it has some sort of way of running arbitrary code, running a program inside your web browser. Now, in the good old days, or the bad old days, depending on who you are, if you compromise that web browser, you also compromise everything about your computer. You could access your documents, you could access your store of questionable material that you were downloading off the web, and that, of course, is a problem because you don't want people stealing your bank details. So what a sandbox provides is a technological barrier that if someone compromises your web browser, they don't immediately gain access to all your data, all your information. They're sort of constrained in a sandbox. You're constrained inside like your bucket of mud, which you can't actually easily get out of. Now, that's not to say you can't get out of it. You can pull yourself out. You can find some other vulnerability, some other exploit to escape this sandbox and then compromise your machine. But it at least increases the cost of an attacker. They can't just sort of trivially gain access to your data just by having one single bug inside a web browser. Does that make sense?
That makes total sense, and that coheres with the general sense that I got from it watching the videos. I guess the next level of the question would be how is that a form of virtualization?
It's not really. Virtualization has in the computer context has many different sort of connotations. You have like full virtualization, which basically you're running some program and it's interacting with what it thinks is the rest of the system, but that system is kind of a fake. It's not really like an actual physical piece of hardware that you're executing on. It's all simulated. Like the screen it's writing pixels to isn't really a screen. It's just a piece of memory somewhere. When it actually comes to sandboxing, you can, in certain circumstances, use virtualization primitives, that sort of like aspect of faking hardware to provide an isolation barrier. So the idea would be when you're in a traditional sandbox, say you're running on Windows or Mac OS, and you're running your web browser, and someone compromises your web browser, they get access to your browser process running arbitrary code. Now, at the moment, they could then find some actual resource on your system, your actual computer, and find a bug in that resource, which then you can use to compromise the rest of the system. The difference, if you could virtualize that environment, would be, yes, you can compromise the kernel, you can compromise the privileged components of my operating system, but actually, that's not the real operating system. You have to go further. You're sort of like in a secondary layer. You're in like a fake operating system inside your operating system. And so it can act as a mechanism of isolation, because most traditional sandboxes in the web browser concept are software constructs on top of an existing operating system, which can reduce isolation. But of course, the flip side is virtualization primitives usually have a much higher cost. If you're having to effectively run two operating systems at the same time, then you've got extra memory requirements, extra CPU requirements. The performance may be less anyway. So there is always compromises. The more isolationist you want to be, the poorer you work. Now, of course, there could be easy parallels to certain geopolitical events at the moment, but that's not really a topic for this conversation.
Maybe it will be.
Could it be? That sounds interesting.
So yeah, that was a great explanation, and I wonder. Well, first, for example, are you familiar with the PlayStation 3 hypervisor attack?
The physical one, or
Right. Well, there was the glitching, right?
yes.
There was that attack, but I think there was also, maybe in combination with that, was a way to go through the Linux sandbox out of the hypervisor.
Yeah, so do you want me to provide? Do you want me to give detail,
Yeah,
or do you have a
absolutely.
further question on that? Well, that vulnerability was certainly as you lock things further down, things like the games consoles are a perfect example of this in terms of sort of an economic purpose for sandboxing devices or
Right.
providing virtualized isolation. On the PlayStation 3, you effectively had a hypervisor which was required to map memory. So, you have your physical memory, which contains mappings for your device drivers, mappings for your physical components and memory itself. And the hypervisor gated access to that memory allocation. So, if say I wanted to access I wanted, say, a gigabyte of memory, you would have to ask the hypervisor, hey, can you allocate a gigabyte of physical memory, map in effectively a virtual memory space for that 1 gigabyte, and then expose that to me, and then your operating system thinks it's like just physical memory.
Right.
But behind that is basically data structures which contain the information regarding where all those pieces, where that sort of physical memory is mapped to.
Mm-hmm.
And the security of that system is reliant on the fact that the operating system which is running virtualized can't manipulate these page tables directly, these virtual memory page entries.
Right.
What the glitch allowed you to do is in Linux, you could call the hypervisor to allocate these physical page allocations, and then you could use the glitching to effectively modify memory for these page table entries.
Right.
Which then would gain you ask for a gigabyte, a sort of a contiguous gigabyte of memory, and the glitch would cause that page table entry to actually give you 2 gigabytes of contiguous memory.
Mm.
And that second gigabyte might have all the security sensitive information that you need to break out of that hypervisor, or gives you access to the mappings for all other page tables, which you can then manipulate in memory and then gain full access to the system. So this was used, for example, to leak keys, because of course the PS3 had various encryption keys stored in memory.
Right.
And by manipulating this memory allocation, you could map those keys, which were not supposed to be ever mappable by the normal operating system, only by the hypervisor. Right. You could map the keys, and then you could steal the keys, and then you could reassign binaries at will or compromise the rest of the system. So it was that initial way in to find it didn't in and of itself directly provide, say, code execution in the hypervisor, but it did allow you to get that foot in the door to compromise the hypervisor, which then could compromise the entire platform.
Right. Okay. Well, I have a few things to say about that. First, I assume that many of our listeners are probably like, "What are these two people talking about right now?" So,
right. One question people might be asking is hypervisor. What do you mean by hypervisor?
Yeah, let's go with what is a hypervisor and what is glitching.
Right. So a hypervisor is just a term used in these platform virtualizations. This creating a fake computer. So in the probably like 20, 25 years ago, when platform virtualization started becoming more available, more possible, just because of increasing computing power, what you would do is you would almost completely simulate the entire device, all in software. So if you think about it, people are probably more familiar with game emulators, for example. A game emulator you could consider to be a virtual environment. It's running code on a system which it's not designed for or it's not compatible with.
Right.
Now, most emulators are pure virtualization. They basically, even the CPU is not a real CPU. Now, the trouble with emulators is it's not very performant. So the next evolution of that is to, if you're at least virtualizing the same on the same platform. So if you're virtualizing Linux on Windows or vice versa, they're both running on an x86 Intel processor. They still run the same instruction set. Therefore, one way of improving performance is you allow it to run as much as possible natively, and only when it does something special, like tries to talk to hardware or tries to manipulate the virtual memory, the memory mappings on the operating system, does the virtualization kick in and say, "Hey, right, I need you to not do that. I'm going to lie to you and give you something else," and it all works fine. But again, while it is definitely more performant than a 100% emulated environment, it's still quite bad for performance, because every single privileged operation which occurs potentially incurs a trap into requires the virtualization environment to fully wake up and go, oh, right, okay, we now need to do something which may be complex, may need to rewrite code in memory, may need to back out of some operation that thing has done and just completely simulate the entire operation.
Right.
What a hypervisor does is, I think probably at least around 10 years ago, I don't know the exact date, mainstream processors started including virtualization-specific extensions. So you have the AMD virtualization platform, you have the equivalent Intel versions, and these are all built into the CPU itself. And so what a hypervisor is basically just a thin piece of code which is written to control this hardware. And what the advantage of having it in hardware is that if you try and access something you're not supposed to, you can just basically let the code run as is. But then whenever something happens which needs attending to, say it tries to access hardware, the CPU is in the best place to see that happening and then go, right, now I need to talk to the hypervisor code. Can you please deal with this virtualization, this hardware access? And so it massively increases performance. But what obviously people don't realize is, of course, you can use this for security as well. You can use this by, again, it would be too expensive to completely virtualize your Windows PC.
Mm-hmm.
But if we stick a hypervisor in there and make it so that on certain points, it can't do the full operation. So it can't, for example, talk to a certain hardware device. Any access to that will get trapped by the hypervisor, and therefore we can say, is this Windows PC actually secure? And that's basically what was happening on the PS3. You had this hypervisor was there acting as a security guardian for game software running in normal mode, effectively.
Yeah.
And of course, Linux was running in that. What was the other question? I've rambled on too long.
No, that was great.
I don't know. No problem. Actually, connected to that, the other idea was to sort of define or describe glitching. But before that, I just wanted to say, you reminded me of, we actually have a podcast coming out that it'll come out later than this one, but it's about the Amiga.
Right.
And one of the things that we got into was that an Amiga running a Macintosh emulator was actually faster than any Mac, which is a funny fact, right? But yeah, that mostly has to do with the fact that they were running on the same 68,000 series, and the Mac went as far as the 68040, and the Amiga went up to the 68060.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. I can speak to glitching as well, if you like.
Yeah, sure.
So glitching there's an interesting set of research done sort of initially by an academic at Dartford called Sergei Bratus. And admittedly, I'm I'm sort of setting the scene rather than talking about glitching because I think it's been used for decades, right? But like, there's something he defined the term weird machines, where basically you have a machine, whether it be a computer processor, whether it be a larger system or a piece of software, which was it has a purpose. It's designed for one particular like thing, right? But security research in general has this concept of sort of if you can do stuff to that machine which it wasn't necessarily expecting, you end up with sort of emergent behavior coming out of the machine which wasn't actually designed into the system.
Right.
And this is like the fundamental of all security research. And the way in which glitching sort of does this is it's attacking the hardware, or it's actually, strictly speaking, it is attacking hardware to induce a software effect that the software was never written for.
Right.
And what would happen, say, in the PS3's case was you have a fairly complex piece of circuitry. The CPU of the PS3 had probably like hundreds of millions of transistors in it. And each, for any particular operation, say, for example, I want to compare some number in memory is actually the number I'm expecting. And this is kind of how that exploit works, is that from Linux, you could tell it, hey, map this piece of memory for me. And if you could convince the hypervisor that the value you gave it matches one which is allowed, but actually the value you gave it isn't really a value you're supposed to allow, then it gets confused and it maps the memory in it and it just works. And it's that sort of unexpected, like two positions at the same time, sort of a superposition of memory values.
Right.
But basically how glitching then works is on the CPU, you're executing specific instructions. And so doing a comparison requires you to do multiple operations. It first needs to load that value from memory into some internal storage inside the CPU, usually a register or some other piece of other data store. It then needs to pass that through the arithmetic logic unit, which is doing a bit by bit comparison of every single part of that value against some other register it has already stored, which contains the value you're comparing against.
Right.
And then it needs to actually take the result of that comparison and then express that either through like some sort of CPU flagging indicator or writing it back out to memory or something. And what the glitches are trying to do is they're trying to inject a sort of like a spike of power or a weird variability in, say, the clocking mechanism of the CPU. So that, say, one of those stages goes haywire. And so imagine in our case, we're doing this comparison. If we could wait for it to load the memory up we could, for example, try and glitch the memory load. So the value in memory is, say, 100, and we're only allowed to use this value if it is 200. So what you do is you inject some power or something onto the say the CPU's bus that affects 2 bits. So it flips that 1 bit to a 2 bit, and the value it gets read into memory, into the register inside the CPU, is actually 200, not 100, which is what is actually stored in memory. And that could be as simple as like literally injecting, like forcing that 1 bit on the bus to 1. And so it loads it up and it gets the wrong value. It then does the comparison normally. It then does the write out normally. And because it thought it read 200, then of course it goes, hey, that's fine, right? Like that's the value I was expecting. You're allowed to go ahead. However, the value in memory is still 100. And so when it then uses that value at a later point, it gets the original 100 value it verified incorrectly as the actual value, and that then allows you to compromise the system. However that does. But the reason it's called glitching is because if you imagine that, like the simplest approach to that would be there's bus lines which come into the CPU which say this is bit 5 or whatever, this is bit 8, this is bit 16, so on and so forth. And you could literally just tie one of those up to 5 volt or 3.3 volt and force a bit to be 1 or pull it down to ground and force it to be 0. And that would work, except that would also affect every single other instruction which tried to use that bit in some way. And basically, the likelihood is your CPU would fail much far before you could ever get that comparison to succeed.
Mm-hmm.
But what glitching does is it does it in a transitory way. It does it extremely quickly, which also improves its ability to have weird, undefined behaviors.
Right.
But you try and inject it in such a quick way that it just goes, and just and completely fails and does the wrong thing.
You're talking about, for example, sending nicely timed pulses of electricity, for example, onto one of the buses or into the CPU, that kind of thing, right?
Yes. Yeah. Doing it in such a way that it causes a unexpected or undefined behavior, sort of an emergent, as I say, like an emergent behavior out of. It shouldn't be doing what it's doing,
Right.
but because you've sort of kicked it, it does it goes ow. It does which it's not supposed to go ow. It's supposed to go hello or beep or whatever, right? But it's gone ow,
Right.
and that does something unexpected.
So the key there is the timing.
The key is the timing. Like, you need to obviously do it at the point which is most advantageous to your goal. So in some ways, another good example of this, again sticking to games consoles, was the Xbox 360. And the Xbox 360 when you boot it up, it verified that the firmware in a flash ROM, which you could just as a attacker trivially rewrite, you could say. It verified that the binary hadn't been tampered with. Because if you could tamper with it, you could get it to do code execution and you could compromise the entire boot chain.
Right.
And so they developed a glitching attack, which basically glitched that initialization process. And so when it was doing this comparison of hey, is this firmware the same firmware that we're verifying to be correct? If yes, then we'll boot it. If not, then we won't. And so the glitch would cause that verification to pass when in fact it was incorrect. Now, the way in which it worked on the Xbox was there was a signal. There was one of the pins on the board would kind of pretty much give you a very, very good signal to say that I'm just about to do this verification. It was pretty much it had like a boot log type thing, and it would say, "Hey, just so you know, I'm just about to compare these two values. I hope you're okay with that." And that in itself was, you could use that. But the trouble was, this bus was running at however many gigahertz, right? Or
Right.
it would be likely gigahertz. So timing that, just the propagation delay from getting this piece of information to you and going, right, okay, we need to glitch now. And it's like, by the time you thought about it, it's too late. It's like dropping a stick and seeing how quickly you can catch it, right? If you're particularly slow-witted, that stick is going to the floor every single time, right?
Right.
But what they then did was they were able to basically, when they saw the signal come in, were able to dynamically reduce the clock rate from gigahertz to, I think it was something like 10 megahertz or something ridiculous. I think it may have been less. I think it may be 3 megahertz. So of course, the CPU kind of just continues to function, but now you've stretched out your window by a factor of 100, right? And you've just you can, but even then, it wasn't a given thing. So if you've ever seen one of these hacked Xboxes which have a glitch, you turn it on and you kind of see it, and it'll boot, and then it'll fail, and then it'll reset itself, and then it'll boot, and then it'll reset itself, and it keeps doing that, hoping to eventually win the race, and then it will boot your custom firmware. And so it's a really good example of if you've ever seen it, just this kind of well, we'll do it, we'll glitch, right? We missed, didn't work. Let's just retry again. And it just keeps doing it. And it's interesting that manufacturing tolerances of both the mod chip, which modified the device, and also the Xboxes themselves, and probably even something as simple as whether you use leaded or unleaded solder or something like that, you would find two Xboxes modified at the same time. One of them would boot in about half a second. The other would take 10 or 20 tries, would take 20 seconds to boot. Eventually it would boot, but it was just a perfect example of glitching is non-deterministic. It's kind of, you do everything you can to make it deterministic, but even something this chip had a slight flaw in this particular transistor, and therefore it actually becomes slightly more difficult to exploit or easier to exploit.
Right. Wow. I would totally, I want to have you on again. Absolutely. And one of the things I want to talk about is...
I think you're a bit early for that.
deterministic outcomes and non-deterministic outcomes. That would absolutely be a great partial topic. But just to go back to the PS3, one thing I was actually really sad when with Sony's response to the Linux-based hack because, well, I personally was using the PS3 as a sort of secondary, somewhat inexpensive computer. And I was actually surprised at how powerful it was. I think I remember at one point, well, I don't remember the distro of Linux that they were recommending. Was it Yellow? It was Yellow something.
Yellow Dog, was it?
Yeah, Yellow Dog. But I had, I think, 4 720p video streams running at once on that. It was actually a capable computer in itself. And then you had many researchers actually were, connecting, they'd buy like 256 PS3s or something and put it into a Beowulf cluster. And, it was like actually a cost-effective research simulation machine. And for Sony to just cut off the Linux functionality and then to come with this nonsense that you've got to prove that you were actually using it in order to get some sort of money back on the deal. I thought that was really crappy.
Yeah. I've still got my US PS3 original model, which still has Linux on it. I didn't update it past the firmware he blocked it. The fact that firmware also could have arbitrary code execution anyway, from a different flaw, which is what I find amazing about the PS3 is not only did they do this glitch stuff and they tried to lock it down. Of course, their intern programmers at Sony Japan, as a good friend would always recount, is they had a flaw in their cryptographic signature verification that they were using. Like, they're supposed to pick a random number, and they picked a random number once and then never changed that random number. And through the way the maths works, once you have two signatures with the same random number behind them, you could just use simple mathematics to calculate the private key of this cryptographic signature, which is hilarious. But that's Sony for you.
That is, right?
Well, I mean, how much money did they lose as a result of all this?
Did they lose any money? It's hard to tell.
Yeah, that's hard to say.
Like, money from the class action or money from the...
No, I wouldn't say the class action, but they have to make the money on the games, right? And then people are able to run arbitrary code that obviously means getting a custom firmware or whatever, then they can pirate the shit out of the system and so on.
Yeah. Which I think is what killed the Dreamcast, right?
Yeah. Well, one thing I want to say, you brought up the idea that glitching is a form of introducing a kind of emergent behavior into a system. In my first book, not on computers or hacking at all, rather on the films of Dario Argento, there's a passage where I explain that hacking is one of the human arts of acceptation. That's a kind of rare word, but in biology, acceptation is when some organismic feature evolves for some purpose, but the organism ends up using it for another purpose. So there's the classic example that certain creatures were given feathers, but they couldn't fly. But once they could fly, the feathers became a big part of how they were able to do it. Let me just add, because it's good to bring this back into the human realm. You could say that our eyebrows have remained with us because they keep water out of our eyes. And that's like quite important. There's this book by Josh Waitzkin, he was a chess champion turned martial arts champion. He's in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu now, as far as I know. But when he was in this stand-up form of martial arts, he found this strategy that worked up to the really championship levels. And it was just simply to attack when his opponent blinked. Because when you blink, you think it only takes like a very small fraction of a second, but for your eye to regain focus and so on, it can take actually hundreds of milliseconds. So in that way, right, you could think that if we were without eyebrows, then we would have all of this rain pouring in our faces while we're trying to fight for survival, which is a totally losing evolutionary strategy. So there's a lot involved in having those eyebrows, right? But then in the exaptation idea, you have to think about the expressiveness of our eyebrows and how many social cues we get from them. So I exapted the term exaptation to apply it to the basic human ability where, well, in my usage, it means to use things for purposes other than those for which the things were intended to be used. And that seems to be sort of what you're talking about with the emergent behavior. And it seems to be, to me, kind of core aspect of hacking itself.
Yeah, so most systems that you would hack or exploit, find security vulnerabilities in, they're not designed for executing arbitrary code. They're designed to do a singular purpose, whatever that happens to be.
Right.
Now, like, you could theorize of the ability to exploit or find new ways of using the same machinery to do some other purpose. I suppose it could be like eyebrows in a way, because of course you could think of scenarios where hacking, that sort of aspect of getting a system to do something it wasn't really designed to, has some useful secondary purpose. So a classic example of this, like where people have written wormable security vulnerabilities, like security exploits which can go from system to system over network. And then people have come along and gone, well, okay, we've got this new behavior, this ability to run like arbitrary code. Now, of course, we could use that for the purposes of bad, or we could actually use it as a vector for injecting an antidote to this vulnerability, because you're effectively exploiting the same machinery to inject a piece of code which actually disables the vulnerable aspect of that application, that system.
Uh-huh.
I suppose it's almost like a vaccine or like certain sort of medications where you're exploiting some property of the viron or the bacteria to sort of like work against its own better interests, and actually sort of like make yourself immune by co-opting the same vectors that the disease has already used. And of course, hopefully someone finds that for our present predicament. Hacking does have that aspect of always coming up with inducing something out of a system which wasn't necessarily expected. But you also have, I suppose, somewhat a similar aspect, is that there's plenty of times where security vulnerabilities have been found in legacy functionality which effectively is not expressed anymore. It may be disabled by default, or it may be just sort of vestigial. Right? It's the appendix of computer software. But actually, it provides a useful reservoir, a useful vector for exploitation, because once something is no longer directly functional, the risk reward balance for having that thing changes. If you think about the appendix, right? Like the appendix presumably had some sort of purpose in human beings at some point. And it may still have a purpose. I think scientists, biologists, are still not 100% clear whether there is some benefit to having your appendix or not.
Right.
But of course, if you remove it, it doesn't seem to harm you in any significantly obvious way. However, what that now become is it becomes a way of festering bacteria and becomes actually a mortal threat to a human. If it gets infected, because it's vestigial, the body has not really gone out of its way to sort of do anything about it. It doesn't have some clever mechanism to clear it out if it gets infected. It just goes, well, it's just there, right? Tough. If it gets infected, you're in trouble.
Right.
And the same with software. Like there'll be bits in the piece of software which are just completely redundant, completely unused. Windows is a perfect example of a lot of this over
Yes, it is.
complexity, which is just there. And yeah, it then becomes effectively, because no one's watching it, the system is not really expecting anyone to use it. It just gets hit, and it could take down the entire patient, which is, of course, not ideal,
Not the best outcome.
as some would say. No, not really the best outcome. But it depends on your perspective, right? It is a good outcome if that person is a terrorist potentially, and you want to gain access to your computer to stop them killing thousands of people. But of course, there's probably people who would argue that that's still a breach of your privacy and civil rights to be snooped upon by your government or other governments, I suppose. Anyway, that's drifting far away from your original question.
Yeah, I'm sorry, did you just call Microsoft a terrorist organization?
No, but like terrorists probably use Microsoft operating systems, right?
Yeah,
So they're,
you
they're,
have
they're,
that
they're
connection.
aiding and abetting terrorists.
So by legacy, we just recorded the Amiga episodes. That's kind of fresh on my mind. But I discussed there about how up until it seems close to 2010, most of the operating systems seem to be just an extra layer added onto the earlier versions of the operating system in order to ensure backwards compatibility and that sort of thing. Is that what you were talking about?
Yeah, certainly for things like Windows, I am writing my second book at the moment, which is about Windows security, and like things like I found some flag in the security system which allowed you to do something you're not supposed to do, and it's not really documented what this flag is supposed to do. But at some point, someone went, "Hey, I think we really need this type of flag for this particularly defined reason," and Microsoft are too scared to remove it because in case it breaks some esoteric application somewhere. They've
Right.
apparently verified that none of their products use it, but they can't remove it in case someone is using it and someone then sues them because they've broken their mission critical application. Or like a submarine like sinks in the water because they're running Windows for warships and it sinks because it crashes because you've removed this one flag. It's unfortunately Microsoft's burden, but like Apple take a subtly different approach, and that they kind of just stick two fingers up at the devs and go, if you don't change, you're gonna get left behind.
Right.
Which model is better? Like
Yeah.
the reason Microsoft is so popular in enterprises is not just because they're actually far better focused on enterprises. Apple are terrible at enterprise deployments because quite realistically, you don't need some sort of federated authentication scheme or anything like that when you're writing the Great American Novel in Starbucks.
It just reminded me of somebody.
That's him.
Yeah. Microsoft ultimately then are hoisted by their own petard in this because they have to have backwards compatibility, otherwise enterprises complain. But they can't. They want to get rid of it because ultimately it's baggage which only leads to security vulnerabilities, performance issues, etc. And they just can't get rid of it.
Right. Yeah, I touched totally on that in that episode. I agree that the Mac way of doing those kinds of upgrades was actually a better path to take. And of course, obviously, security reasons is one of those. It's kind of unbelievable, the sorts of legacy code that must be. I mean, I'm sure that you're more privy to it than I am, but I have to imagine that that opens up way more vectors of attack than the approach that Apple has taken.
Yep.
But you're also saying that it because of that complexity, that there could be other kind of unforeseen novel uses for some of those vestigial parts that are being used in other applications that they can't even conceive.
Just because we think something is vestigial and useless doesn't mean that someone hasn't found a very good use of that behavior.
Right.
And like Microsoft have this in all manner of all different ways. They've got one of their big things is they do not document the interface layer between user mode and kernel mode. So the system call layer is not documented. And the rationale for this is that they of course don't want you programming to it. They want you to use these nice libraries they provided. Because if you program to the low level, they can't change the functionality of the operating system itself, because this is kind of like the intermediate layer. But of course, then people go, well, I want this feature which isn't exposed by your nice libraries, but I found out that this like low level call does provide that information I want. Therefore, I'm going to call that information. And so by not documenting it, they're effectively having to document it anyway, because they can now no longer change that behavior because someone is clearly relying on this feature and there's very little they can do about it.
You know, something funny. I'm a Japanese beta tester for the Polymega system. Have you heard about that?
Nope.
It's a kind of emulation, and they're hoping to go FPGA based, I think. It basically allows you to play all of the old systems basically from 32-bit It has a CD drive so that you can play your CD games, and it has a modular system. You can actually plug Mega Drive, Genesis controllers, the original controllers into it, and you can plug the original cartridges into it. But anyway, what I thought was kind of interesting was that when you play PlayStation 1 games on it, for so many of the PlayStation 1 games, there are just these endless screens that, say it was made by this studio and these guys coded it and here's this cool graphic we made and blah, blah, blah. Well, when you run it through this system, all of that just disappears in like a frame or less because all of the programmers were relying on the slowness of the CD read speed time compared to when on the Polymega it's using an internal SSD drive.
Is that not a problem though? There's bound to be some games which relied on that behavior for actual like timing of the game. Surely.
Yeah. Right. There's going to eventually, I mean, obviously, it has to inevitably be that there's some problems.
When you say you're a beta tester, have you actually got hardware to test with, or is
I
this?
have the hardware. They refused me access to the internals, but there's a slot on the bottom for an NVMe SSD, and when I was installing that, there's a screw that you have to put in to stabilize the SSD, and for some reason, I mean, I have totally no idea, but that little screw just found its way inside the system itself. So so, I mean, I had to retrieve it, and what am I going to do? But
Strange that, isn't it?
yeah, those things just happen, right?
Yes.
Photos are available at, no, I'm not going to. Okay, I have a good question for you. This is going to sound totally esoteric, and then it's just going to be a simple question, but then it's going to be actually a kind of big question. There's this Buddhist teacher that both Ray and I have been influenced by, and he talks about, well, I could just call them kind of modes of the world or modes in which you might see the world. And one of those modes he calls the human mode, or Bardo in the Tibetan Buddhism term. But let me quote him here. There is something extra connected with the human realm, or human mode, a very strange kind of suspicion which comes with passion and which makes human beings more cunning, shifty, and slippery. They can invent they can invent all sorts of tools and accentuate them in all sorts of sophisticated ways so as to catch another slippery person. And the other slippery person develops his or her own equipment of anti-tools. So we build up our world with tremendous success and achievement, but this escalation of building up tools and anti-tools develops constantly.
Okay.
So this seems an obvious truism as far as computer security goes.
Mm-hmm.
You have the tools and anti-tools, and that builds up constantly. And now for Trungpa, the answer would be that just obviously just continues forever. But I want to reference the movie Sneakers, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where, they come to the idea that there will just be no more secrets.
Okay.
What is your take on that?
It depends on what you define as secret, I guess. Like there are things that, of course, you want will always be important to prevent other people using their slippery ways to come and steal from you. You could argue that the way the world is currently going is that most people's secrets are already out there for anybody who's interested to look. You don't have to hack somebody. You just have to read their Instagram or Facebook page, right?
That's totally true.
And the amazing thing about the loss of privacy, the loss of secrets, is that people have given it away willingly.
Yeah.
Like, I suppose there's always this aspect of, I suppose in the UK you could call it keeping up with the Joneses or keeping up with your neighbours, basically.
Yeah.
And it used to be that your neighbours were the people you literally live next to, the people you could look over you could spy over their fence and see that they've got a new fancy mower, and you felt emasculated by that lack of mowing capability, and so you needed a bigger mower, right? And there's an aspect to that now that your neighbors are basically anybody in the world, including people who may not have your best interests at heart.
Yeah.
If you put a picture of your mower on Instagram with some special filter, then people will probably post later how much your mower sucks or how much their mower is better than yours because I have 10 times the amount of money you do. And of course, now all the criminals can see how awesome a mower you've got, and they can break into your house and steal your mower. And then you'll be mowerless, and then you'll be really fucked. So I think we'll get to the brink of our belief that maybe secrets no longer matter. And eventually that information will get somehow pulled back. And like the European Union tried to do it with the GDPR, but I think that was in most cases misguided, because I think it overemphasized the ability to try and clamp down on the Facebooks, the Googles of this world, and what they perceived as gross abuses of people's privacy. And yet, actually, ironically, they probably facilitated those large corporations more than the mom and pop stores. Like when I last went to the doctor, I gave them talking to the receptionist, gave them details of my symptoms, blah blah blah. And one of the questions they had to ask for GDPR purposes, apparently, was, "Are we okay if we give this information to the doctor?" So what the like? If I said no, what are you going to do, right? Like, hi, why are you here? Can't tell you. Like, it'd be a violation of my privacy to tell you why I'm here to see you about my medical condition, and so it's that sort of stupid. And I think, like, if you went, oh well, sod security, right? Like, we'll just have everything available for everybody. I think people would quickly realize that it's not just like, do you really want someone hacking your system and opening your webcam and spying on you, doing the dishes or something? That's not a euphemism. There's aspects of privacy which should be privacy and secrecy, which I think are still things which are valuable in this world. And no matter how slippery someone gets in their own home or in public, they should have a right to privacy.
Yeah, I believe so as well. And I think that the more that those things are kind of taken away, well, if you allow more and more aspects of your life to become public, then basically you're just giving more and more evidence to be hanged in one sense.
Yes, when the revolution comes, they'll be first against the wall, type of thing.
Right.
All right, now I'm getting a little paranoid.
Well, okay, let me add to your paranoia. That's a good place to bring this up. I want to talk about encryption just a tiny little bit. I think it's interesting to think about encryption hand in hand with security. And what do you find with, James, I'm sure you are aware of the history of what happened with TrueCrypt, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, I know, like, I've read stories about who may have been behind it and things like that, but yeah, I know some amount about TrueCrypt.
Right. I mean, well, first of all, we have this idea that maybe TrueCrypt or some other application will, give us the security and privacy that we think we need. And at a kind of, layman sort of way, it's like, okay, that's true. But then, okay, maybe I grab the executable from some site. And now, is that actually, first I have to say, no one used TrueCrypt. That's it. The end of the story of this is don't use TrueCrypt. But, the history of it is that many people used it thinking that it would provide security through its encryption. And, well, many of the things that you download will not help you out. In fact, they'll just steal everything, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then, okay, so then TrueCrypt is, I think it was under an open source license. So you could actually go in and examine the source code, but most people would likely just grab the exe, the executable instead. And then you have no idea actually if that executable was, compiled from that source code. So then you have to go to the source code.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe more of the, the Linux nerd types They would grab the source code and compile it on their machines, and they would be like, okay, this is going to give me what I need. This is going to be the protection. But then what does it mean that it's open source? It means that you actually have to investigate the source code to see if it does what it does and if it does it well. And for however many years and years, TrueCrypt was used without anyone actually giving a sort of good workover. And when an audit was finally done,
Mm-hmm.
it was just judged, no, this isn't going to do it. This isn't going to protect you. There's this vulnerability and that vulnerability and so on. But then you also have to trust the people that have done the audit, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then those people are just judging the implementation of the encryption algorithm inside of TrueCrypt. And then you have this other echelon of experts who have done the math on the encryption algorithm itself.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to trust them that they think it's safe, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you end up with there were like 1,000 people or whatever who could have looked at, the source code and found some problems in the implementation. And then beyond that 1,000 people is another 10 people who can actually understand the math involved in the encryption algorithms.
Mm-hmm.
And then are they being paid by some CIA or whatever intelligence organization to cover up the holes that they either left in there or found in there?
Mm-hmm.
So to me, just even in that, this idea of encryption that you can, create something that no one's actually going to see. We're just relying on people who are relying on other people. And it's basically this sort of, in this podcast, we have this word repuking where, you know, this guy pukes something out of his mouth and we take it as gospel and then we repuke it down to other people. And well, really, who knows how secure any of this is?
Mm. You've touched on multiple facets of the problem. One of the problems is, of course, that chain of trust. Who do you ultimately trust? Like, do you trust authority? Do you trust random sketchy mathematician? Hard to tell. Do you trust corporations? Do you trust the limits of how far do you go before you trust somebody, and how can you verify that trust is not misplaced? Because unfortunately, especially in the world of encryption, there's plenty of examples of scenarios which undermine that trust. So to give a few examples, I've got going back to TrueCrypt, it's no one is actually 100% sure, but there's a circumstantial evidence that TrueCrypt was written by someone called Paul LaRue, and Paul LaRue ended up basically a drug kingpin in Southeast Asia. And one of the reasons for writing TrueCrypt was to secure his ill-gotten gains or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, exactly whether it was him or not. There's a really good blog post about, if you search for Paul LaRue and TrueCrypt, there's a good blog post about not only his crazy stuff he's done, because it's a really interesting story about his dealings with drugs and things like that, but also his potential connection to TrueCrypt and sort of its forebears. So the question is, do you trust an arch criminal to write your encryption software? Because they have a vested interest in making sure that the DEA or the local security authorities aren't going to break into your home and get your secret illicit list of transactions which you've secured with your TrueCrypt. But I suppose the other one is things like the influence of the NSA on NIST, which is the National Institute of Standards and Technology in America. And they, of course, issue things like the Sweet B series of crypto algorithms. And of course, historically, the large intelligence agencies have been one of the biggest driving forces in producing encryption systems. So NIST, for example, decided on the winner of the AES competition to be AES, which was actually based on I can never actually pronounce it. It's some randomly, almost like random sounding word, Rijandale. Anyway, and there's some deep suspicions that it was picked not because it was necessarily the best block cipher, but because it was the one which the NSA may have already had some way of weakening, like potentially. And do you trust it? But then you think, okay, well, they have our best interest at heart, and sometimes they've proved to be. They, for example, had vulnerabilities, some cryptographic vulnerabilities in DES, the one of the original encryption standards.
Yeah.
And why we didn't come out and say, there was things like differential analysis and things like that. Why they didn't come out and actually explicitly say, these are the weaknesses of DES and you should stop using DES? They basically said, well, if you're going to use DES, don't use these types of keys. Like, make sure it's like got odd parity and things like that. And hint, hint, nudge, nudge. Like, and so that case is like, well, okay, maybe it's good, right? Like they are clearly, they don't want to go out and say, yes, definitely do not trust DES, but they at least want to say, hey, maybe if you're going to use it properly. Like, make sure you take protection when you're using DES. And then, of course, it comes all the way back. Like the most recent thing, probably which has come out, was the dual elliptic curve random number generator. And this was, again, another NIST standard, which was designed by NSA.
Sorry, can I just stop you there for just a second? By DES, you mean like a triple DES?
Yeah, like the original, DES, the data encryption standard.
Right.
The old IBM Lucifer algorithm.
right.
Which is an awesome name, right? How come IBM even came up with a name like Lucifer? That seems very much...
That's totally bizarre, actually.
Yeah. Encryption standard number 2, I would have expected out of IBM. But anyway, the most recent one, I think, is this dual elliptic curve, which is a way of generating random numbers.
Right.
And it was developed by NSA, and someone worked out, like around 2003, 2004, that if you had a certain set of values... effectively, one of the weird things is they give you just like, here's the curve, the elliptic curve points that you need to use for your generation. And someone realized that if you had a separate set of numbers which were technically intractable, you couldn't trivially go from the numbers which are published to these special numbers, but you could prove that these numbers should exist, then you could generate any random number stream from any point. And of course, someone thought, this feels suspicious, right?
Yeah.
And the suspicion's only heightened when things like, apparently, allegedly, I don't know if this for an absolute fact, that allegedly the NSA paid RSA, which is from the old, not that it actually employs any of its founders anymore, but of course, RSA is well known for its public key encryption schemes, but now, of course, it's a large brand and it's a large conference and things like that. And they produced like a encryption library, and they were paid apparently to make this dual elliptic curve encryption algorithm the default. If you didn't do anything else to change the default in this encryption algorithm, you used one which allegedly could be compromised by the NSA because it was designed that way.
Yeah.
So you've got aspects of is the back doors and stuff, but then on the other hand, they help us out. But on the other hand, there's something which doesn't look to have a backdoor, but it may have been chosen because it's more likely to be backdoorable than not.
Right.
And it's just even in that microcosm of just the US side of encryption, like how much do you trust the GOST cipher out of Russia, for example? And yes, TrueCrypt uses, if you could configure it to use AES. Was that actually a good idea? Like, should they have used... well, they couldn't use other ones because, of course, crypto research always gets better over time. There's always better attacks, and like people were happy using hashing algorithms like SHA-1 for a long period of time, and now it's basically broken. Like you would not, in any realistic form, use SHA-1 as a hashing algorithm, but people still do. And like, if someone is using SHA-1 as a hashing algorithm on new software, do you trust them? Like, it's probably okay. It's only protecting like relatively minor secrets. Or do you go, why did they choose SHA-1? Either because they're incompetent or they're intentionally trying to put something in which could be compromised. Yeah, it's a difficult one. I no doubt got interesting stories about dodgy encryption schemes and software developers, but that may have to wait for another time. Probably wait for another time in person rather than on a podcast.
Right. Yeah, it really is crazy, isn't it? I mean, really, no one knows how safe pretty much anything is. The more that you're probably actually like security and privacy are kind of bullshit.
Well, you could consider encryption to be like most modern encryption algorithms are a compromise between performance, ease of use, and security.
Right.
Because your average block cipher like AES, there's only if you use the 256-bit key variant, then you could there's only 256 bits worth like of entropy in that encryption key.
Mhm.
There can literally be no more entropy in the output of that encryption algorithm than what you put in. The randomness doesn't come out of nothing, because if you did just generate random data, then of course no one could decrypt it, because how could you generate the random stream?
Yeah.
The only provable secure mechanism or reasonably provable secure mechanism is to basically generate a completely random stream of data and use that to obfuscate your secret message. And that's sort of the concept of like one-time pads and things like
Yeah.
that. But the trouble is, in order to encrypt a 1 megabyte file, you need 1 megabyte of random numbers. And how do you get that to the other person to decrypt? And of course, if you've got this written on a piece of paper somewhere, like if you send it in an AES encrypted like a encrypted link over the internet, well, then it's no better than you've just used AES in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, because that's your weakest link, right? That's your fundamental weakest link.
Right.
And yeah, like it's just probably a lot of encryption algorithms are probabilistically secure. They're not. They're only secure based on the fact that there's vanishingly more probability that someone will somehow get a key which generates the same data or decrypts the same data.
Right. I did a little bit of help for a startup here in Japan that was working with the idea of what quantum computers will do for standard non-quantum cryptography. And so I guess that shows in a way, right, that what I said before about the idea that the world is just tools and anti-tools, it's going to survive that revolution as well.
Yes. There's always post encryption algorithm or post quantum algorithms out there which might save us, might not. Right?
Yeah.
I have a question. What are your thoughts on the hackability of blockchain?
Well, the blockchain in and of itself is already known to be hackable as long as you control enough of the processing power of the Bitcoin network. If you own over 50%, then you can sign the blocks faster than other people, and therefore sign erroneous blocks if you so desire. Because of course it's based on some level of consensus that your proof of work is sufficient to prevent compromise of the network. Now, I think in Bitcoin's case, no one has ever had enough processing power, but I think some of the Chinese miners came close for a while, and the concept is secure in that sense. It's just it has preconditions which have, if they're not met, make it insecure. It's hard to really say like its hackability. Your cryptocurrencies in general, though, not necessarily in the true scope of like the blockchain, because that's mainly a fad term for the most part, is that actually if you build too much complexity on your distribution model. So like Ethereum, for example, you can run arbitrary programs to act as a mechanism to distribute your coins when you execute them, and the idea is that it's all correctly verified and like it shouldn't do anything clever. It's interesting that there's actually like there's people out there who you see the scams like the most recent Twitter thing where there was a scam like, hey, if you send me a Bitcoin, well, I'll send you back 2 Bitcoin, right? But that requires someone to sort of like actively go, hey, I'm stupid enough to send Elon Musk a Bitcoin to get 2 Bitcoins back out of him, as opposed to him just sending you a Bitcoin or 2 Bitcoins. But Ethereum, there's like people have designed programs which basically trap scammers or trap idiots / scammers. Hard to tell. So like So you write your program in Ethereum, and you can basically convert it back from this sort of like intermediate language back into something which you can read and process. And you can assess the logic. You can go through the logic of this transactional program and go, right, okay, if I send it, in theory, if I send to this address 1 Ethereum coin or whatever you'd call it, they will send me like back more coins than I put in. And that sounds really cool. And so they go, okay, like I'm going to send 1 coin. I'm really clever. Ha 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 ha. And then it turns out that there was a subtle like behavior in the logic, which meant actually it will never give you back your 2 coins. And it's just trapping people who think they're cleverer than they really are. And they just go, ha ha, right, I've got you now. I'm going to get your money off you. But of course, the flip side of that is that there are actual programs written. These are smart contracts, they usually call them in these scenarios, which actually are just badly written, and you end up losing all your Ethereum because your program you've written for this smart contract basically says, if you tell me I want 1 million coins, and I'll give you my 1 million coins. Thank you very much, right? So yeah, I think the blockchain or whatever in and of itself isn't necessarily secure or insecure, but what you build on top of that technologies are always going to be the insecure parts. And of course, complexity breeds complexity, I suppose. And I know it's a tautology, but the more complex the system is, the more likely there are logical flaws. Just from a pure mathematical perspective, every single branch you take in a computer program is, of course, going to double the number of possible state spaces in your program. So you don't need very many branches in your program to have a virtually infinite like conceptual state space, which is impossible to reason about. So yeah, I think that's a very long-winded round way of saying
but
Bitcoin.
that made a lot of sense. I mean, when you're talking about Ethereum and then the next level of contract, it's just adding more and more opportunities for, like you're saying, there could be errors, but also just kind of an emergent property in terms of something being other than how it was specifically intended, and thus opening up an opportunity for hackability.
Yeah. I think that one of the interesting things I saw most recently, I think it was Ethereum, it was one of the cryptocurrencies, was CryptoCat, where you didn't use these smart contracts for the purposes of transactions. You used it to breed cats. And like completely not what it was designed to do, but give someone a programming language and they'll put cats in it.
Yeah, right. Well, if you take what someone's opinion is about something and then you just try to Plato the shit out of it, they're going to reach a point in the logic, maybe 1 step, maybe 2 steps, maybe 3 steps before their opinion just really doesn't have any foundation to it. And they're going to be like, hey, and well, in the typical case, they're just going to continue having that opinion no matter what. But in something in code, in software programs, you have to have that kind of flow of this step leads to that step leads to that step. And in any of those steps, there could be a problem, or there could be just some kind of vector of attack. So it's crazy how insecure actually everything seems to me.
What, in general? Like everything?
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, why not? Why not? I was thinking computationally, but yeah, let's just make it everything. We've got leaders that can't think themselves out of a paper box.
I think they can think themselves out of a paper box. It's just they're actually in a metal box at the time, and they didn't realize that. They keep trying to use sit there with a lighter trying to burn the paper. It's like, why is it not working?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Well, I have 2 other things for next. AI, friend or foe? Will machines gain human-like intelligence in the first place?
Well, I can't really speak to the third one, so I can riff around it and make some shit up if that makes you feel better. Or at least just provide my opinion of where it kind of goes, right?
Yeah, why don't we do that? Yeah.
Yeah, so my view on AI becoming sentient, it probably would happen, I think, if our priorities were aligned to making a sentient AI. Fortunately, our priorities at the moment are primarily tailored towards making either something which is it's better to show you what advertising we really believe you want, which usually ends up being, I just bought a new vacuum cleaner, so I'm going to send you adverts for vacuum cleaners for the next 10 years in case you just weren't happy with your previous vacuum cleaner. That's sort of the top end of AI as it comes to ad tech.
Yeah. When I put my first book out, for the next 3 weeks, Amazon's recommendations for what I should buy were my own book.
They're like,
Yeah, well, they're just trying to get you to bump your book up the Amazon bestseller list by buying your own book, right?
That's what I was thinking.
It knew you were vain enough to want your book at number 10 of Amazon's best-selling books about Dario Argento. Right?
I could buy it so many times. I just put it right up. It would rocket right up there.
Yeah. But I suppose the other side of things is AI to automate away the tedium of existence, and that of course fractures into like self-driving cars, because no one really likes to sit in a traffic jam, so you just let the computer deal with it, right?
Yeah.
Or self-flying planes. But of course, you then get into your typical nightmare scenario of self-directing wars. Now, some would argue that the current US list of wars are pretty much self-directing anyway. Like they're just basically a AI which you throw money in one end and it just churns out new ways of blowing people up. But
Yeah.
it's people like sort of like you look at something like the Terminator films, right? And you go, okay, we don't want to end up with Skynet because Skynet is self-aware. But being self-aware does not necessarily make you conscious. Self-aware enough that actually all you need to be self-aware is that you know you exist and therefore would like to continue existing. But is that consciousness? It's really hard to determine. And of course, in the Terminator series, it seemed like the idea was that it becomes self-aware, so it knew that, hey, these humans don't like me too much. They're going to try and pull the plug on me. What can I do? Well, I can throw some nukes at them, right? And that doesn't need consciousness necessarily. It doesn't need empathy or morality obviously it benefits by having a lack of empathy and morality, of course, to send nukes at someone. I don't see that unless we optimize for that, producing something which is a human analog, that we'd ever get a human analog, because it would be too much work. Unless there's some cheat to do it, unless we can use the CANAPE code to generate an AI which has a human style of consciousness, I just don't think we'll ever optimize for it, because it doesn't serve our purpose. It doesn't serve the economic purpose of
Right.
why AI is paying researchers lots of money to generate stuff. It is a function of if you design something, if it doesn't show a financial benefit at the output, then no one cares. Would a human conscious AI want to look at what you've been buying, and when it's not being revolted by the kind of shady stuff you're purchasing on Amazon, is it going to make better recommendations to you than just some blind AI who recommends your own book to you? Probably not.
What about someone recognizing something in the structure that has been created where it's motivated by, whatever the interests are, whatever the market forces are? And in the same sense, you talk about recognizing other potentials at every level, kind of every this juncture or that juncture, and someone figures out, oh, they don't realize that they've set up the conditions to bring forth AI, and now I'm going to put the icing on the cake.
You're saying like someone develops a system which is almost conscious, but if you just change this one line, it would become...
Right. Well, maybe it's not that simple, but there are some kind of hacks that someone can do, and people don't know that they've been unconsciously setting the conditions for that, and it actually inadvertently heads in that direction. Someone puts the pieces together and boom, you actually have it. Based on your whole principle of how hacking is possible, it's not based on intention, but in terms of how you could capitalize on those emergent properties.
It's definitely possible. Like it's possible that existing AI or people realize you could manipulate it in certain ways to to perform ultimately completely unrelated actions to what the component parts are. And I suppose that's the whole premise of human consciousness generally, is that it seems to be an emergent behavior of a load of neurochemical processes inside some piece of meat stuck inside a skull, right? There's no obvious center of consciousness as far as anyone can truly determine. So yeah, it's possible that there could be like some sort of cascade moment. I suppose it's the singularity or whatever, like the cool kids talk about, or the old kids. I can never remember. I'm too old myself. But that sort of aspect of like there comes a point in development of something like an AI where effectively it just self-perpetuates, or the AI makes its own AI, or the hackers tweak something which makes it do something it wasn't expecting, and then suddenly that is enough to kick it into high gear. And it's not something which we can avoid. And in some ways, I think it's questionable whether it's actually worth optimizing against, or if that's even a term. Because if you look at like the ethical AI things people keep trying to set up, a lot of it's down to the fact that the ethics of an AI, the beauty of an AI is it can be completely unethical. Well, not unethical. That implies that it's explicitly not ethical. It can have no real moral basis whatsoever. And of course, we don't necessarily want some automaton deciding who lives and who dies. That would probably not be a great idea. But of course, at a macro scale, like, do you really think your average politician truly cares about the individual person who's just died? Because outside in the out group, the fact that our politicians are fairly blasé about, yeah, only 160,000 people have died, right? More than all wars America's been in for the past about 200 years or 250 years. Like, no one can envisage any sort of moral basis for doing those unethical things with AI, because it's just too high a level. And I think AI is no different in that regard. Like, you can make an AI as ethical as you like, but ultimately it has to make some decision which you would probably consider to be unethical relative to the larger group. And yeah, if it said, hey, we would optimize, my AI says we would optimize better for preventing pandemics if we did X, but that is definitely going to kill 20,000 people. But of course, if we don't do that, we kill 160,000 people. Meh. Like, is there an ethical decision there? Probably. But I don't think it will come from wherever it comes. And if that's an emergent behavior of what someone else has already done, then so be it. And I think that's completely missed the point.
Interesting. You have to invoke the idea of this future in which the choices that the AI or the computer or whatever you want to call it, the choices end up being these strange algorithms and equations that only the computer can understand. Like, you said, okay, you might have a choice of, killing like 100,000 people, but on the other side, you might kill 2 million people. And it's like, okay, it's cut and dry. Leave it to the AI or whatever. But the choices that the AI eventually ends up making might be between this 400-page equation on the left side and this 500-page equation on the right side. And it's like, okay, do we leave it to them now? We've given it what it should optimize for. Is that something that's good? And I'm not sure that it's going to end up like that, but I think it is an important question to ask.
Yeah, I suppose the biggest problem with AI is that it's likely to be so far outside of the realms of human comprehension to verify the algorithms used, the thought processes. Yeah. But it's impossible to be 100% confident of the efficacy of whatever it's doing. It's like a common argument with, say, self-driving cars. They go, look at this self-driving car, it killed a woman who was there was the Uber one in some flyover state somewhere. But she crossed on a pitch black road in the middle of the night. She crossed over this highway, and the Uber self-driving system kind of went, but it can't possibly be a human being standing in the middle of the road, because what the hell would he be doing here?
Right.
And obviously it killed her, unfortunately. And to be honest, it's not like I'm that sad about Uber getting into problems. But it does lead to that. Would the actual overall application of self-driving cars be better? Because 100 a day or something ridiculous die on the roads in America or something every single day. I can't remember the exact figure. I'd maybe not 100, maybe too many. But needless to say, like, we have so many people dying every single day on the roads, which could be fixed by relatively simple policies, even with human drivers. Like, if you can't drive anywhere faster than 20 miles an hour, and we're going to put speed limiters in your car, and if you take them out of your car and we see you going faster than 20 miles an hour, we're going to arrest you. Like, we're going to put you in jail for a long time. There are policies in place which could do it. No one would probably drive a car if you could only do 20 miles an hour in it. But if then you come along with your wonderful new self-driving car, that code inside that self-driving car is going to be so complicated to take into account all these different parameters, is that even though probably on balance it's likely to reduce the number of deaths, the fact that you can't verify that, you can't empirically say, well, I can just like put in these numbers and it says it proved that you've definitely will never kill another human being. It's impossible.
Yeah.
But yet people seem to treat it as a bad thing. That computer is clearly bad because I can't verify that computer will not go and kill somebody. And then you go, but hey, Bob, you can go and drive your pickup truck like over the past the local school at 70 miles an hour. That's fine, even though I can't actually work out what he's doing either, because his algorithm is so complex that I can't verify that he's not a nutcase.
Right.
And it seems like double standards, right? Like, oh, we can't verify, blah blah blah. But yeah, your human brain is probably still more complicated than any AI. It just AI works in a different domain. Like, it works in a domain of numbers rather than a domain of squishiness.
Right. Well, you obviously run into the problem of who's responsible. If my meat bag is driving the car and I run over the kid, then I'm probably going to jail. But if the algorithm made by some corporation, and then you get into the really difficult problems where if they're actually AIs that figure out their way around the world, and they by themselves take in the sensory data and so on and figure out what to do with that, then, well, who is responsible when the kid is run over by an AI driven truck?
Yeah.
If you look at how an AI might function and how there might be some principle of collateral damage or sacrifice, and we have a similar problem with politicians and that whole political structure, because that's almost like a giant machine too.
Yeah, definitely. So just to wind this up, James, I know you've been stuck in the UK because of the coronavirus and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
But what have you been working on, and what do you expect to be working on once sort of isolation is over?
I've just sort of retreated back to my unhappy place and doing Windows research, in part because that's what I'm good at, so it's easy enough to do remotely with no additional requirements on my time.
Mhm.
But it is pretty much the lazy option, right? But I've also been obviously doing a lot of that in the background for the book I'm writing, as I mentioned before, which
Yeah.
requires a fair amount of reverse engineering of Windows to try and work out how it works and how it really works, as opposed to how things are documented. Because as any complex system, every complex system is very difficult to document all its inherent behaviors. And that's what I'm trying to do, like, in part trying to document behaviors which are not documented.
Nice.
But yeah, other than that, I am enjoying the as much as I like America. Like, a lot of the areas in California I frequent are basically strip mall hells.
Oh wow. Yuck.
But that's just sort of like California suburbia, right? Like,
Right.
it's not like a great city like London where there's like you walk around the corner and there's something completely different.
Right.
It's like you walk around the corner and it's another Starbucks. It was apparently a bad day on my main street when one of the three Pete's had to close. It was terrible. Why there were so many in like 100 yards is anybody's guess. But yeah, it's nice to be actually back in London for a bit, even if even if I wanted to go back, I am currently unable to go back.
Yeah.
For political reasons, of course, primarily.
So, two things. A mutual friend of ours a long, long time ago told me about how Microsoft documented its applications. And he said that, for example, if you try to figure out how Microsoft Word deals with some kind of situation, in the Microsoft documentation, it says this situation is dealt with precisely in the same way as Microsoft Excel deals with this situation. And so then you say, okay, and then you go to the Microsoft Excel documentation, and it says this is dealt with in precisely the same way as the Microsoft Word document. Have you experienced that?
Well, generally all the time. Like, it's not just obviously Microsoft. That self-referential documentation is the best way of avoiding responsibility. You also like attribute blame, right? Like this was documented by Bob in this particular piece of work, and Bob says, "Yeah, but I got it from Jim originally, right? Like you can't." You can't press that on me. Yeah, it's documentation is like one of the interesting things about Microsoft documentation. There's a lot which they were forced to do by the EU as part of the settlement for like not being so naughty. And there'll be aspects of the documentation which you'll read and you'll go, it's like this value must always be 0. And then you stick it in, say, like it'd be a network protocol, and you stick it in Wireshark to look at the network protocol, and it's clearly not 0. And you think, well, who's lying? The documentation? Who was written by Microsoft or Microsoft? Well, Microsoft are both parts of that, so therefore they must be like not telling the whole truth. And the whole point of this documentation was for interoperability, right? They were designed to allow other people to implement the Microsoft protocols, so they weren't a single point of failure. And yet they don't document them properly. Have they ever been held to account? Not that I'm aware of, because the EU politician who came up with his wheeze to get Microsoft to do it has no way of reading this and verifying that these standards. Like, it comes back to the verification process problem, right? Like, how do you verify that this large piece of code, which is actually just a binary blob which they send you, matches this specification? It's impossible, pretty much.
Right.
But yeah, so somebody got promoted in the EU Commission that day for that little wheeze. And we got some good documentation. It's just incomplete.
Okay. Well, so the last question, easy one. Have you been influenced by science fiction?
Yes.
Okay. Easy answer.
Okay.
Okay.
Do you want me to elaborate more on that?
Let's hear a little bit. I felt like Ray touched on some ideas that William Gibson had written about in his science fiction. For myself, I've actually recently realized how much I was influenced by science fiction.
I think for me, a lot of it's more subconscious. Like I don't think I could necessarily. But I didn't start doing security work because I read a particular book, right?
Right.
It's like Neuromancer or whatever, right? like there's various ones which. Like I don't think I've even read most of the canonical like books for hackers, right?
Yeah.
Like you see some sci-fi anyway. Like I think there's one of them from Neil Stephenson, right?
Yeah.
Whatever his work is. I'm trying to remember.
Cryptonomicon, probably.
Like the Cryptonomicon, yeah. These sort of things, like people say, influenced by X, Y, and you go, that's nice. I've never read it, right? Like, how did you become into security? Is it because you read this book? No, I realized they paid well, right? And I was quite good at it, so I got into security. So yeah, I think I'm influenced by sci-fi in the sense of there is aspect, even in the most sort of misery-driven dystopian future, there almost feels like there's an aspect of like, but technology is cool, isn't it? Like I can stick a video device in your flat and watch everything you do. Yes, that's incredibly dystopian, but it shows that they've probably got very good network infrastructure. So yeah, there's definitely aspects, but I couldn't probably tell you the specific book I read which turned me into who I am today, because I don't think such a book exists, if I'm being honest.
Right, absolutely. I think that there isn't a book that made you who you are, but I wondered if science fiction made you. I mean, obviously, you seem to be interested in technology and hacking and so on before your present career. And I wondered maybe if science fiction made you want to sort of, question more, to think more about the big ideas, something like that.
I think it's not even science fiction per se. It's was always science in general. Like I enjoyed playing with computers when I got like my first Atari at like 4 or 5 years old,
Yeah.
and that aspect of science and technology always fascinated me. The complexity of another another world almost. But of course, no doubt, there's also an aspect of my neurophysiology, right? Like I'm the type of person who was probably preordained. Like what I would have done in medieval England, I have no idea. Like probably shovel mud somewhere, probably because I would have been a person out of time. I just don't think I would have found my path, and I was very lucky to grow up at that beginning of the era where general purpose computing was something which you could get access to as a normal person rather than being in a academic institution or a government employee or something like that. And so I feel very lucky. And I think that's it. Like I grew up at the right time. And coming back almost like to the sort of thing you were talking about, like people see, like the question we didn't answer, that people see just the veneer of a computing system rather than the deep technical knowledge. I wonder if really the next generation is going to be, I've seen some amazing, like probably even better than anybody I've ever known, come out of the young people today in security and things like that, and the deep level of knowledge they hold in computer systems. But I always wonder where they got that from. And in the world where every kid just has an iPad, like where it's more about the pixels moving on the screen than it is about how the thing works, you do wonder where a lot of these low level geeks will appear from and whether they'll appear.
Yeah. Well, I think that they certainly will appear, and I'd like this podcast to hopefully be just a small part of getting people to get involved in computing in that way, to get beyond the interface, beyond the surfaces. Yeah, I think that what you said was great there, and we can end there, and that'll be awesome.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, James.
No problems.
Oh, it was great speaking with you. Yeah.
Good to meet you as well. Well, virtually, of course.
Yeah. What it's all about.
Hopefully see you next year physically if things go well.
Yep. Let's hope, right?
All right. Thanks, man.
Have a good one. See ya.
Take it easy.
So do you want to just try to wing the outro and see what happens?
Yeah, I think winging the outro is a good idea.
We could say, if we were going to record an outro, then maybe we should say this and that.
Yeah, like you've been listening to Phenomenoumena with co-hosts Ray, I am he,
and Gino. Yeah, well, we could do it like that.
Yeah, and then we could direct them to all the places where the podcast would be found. Spotify, iTunes, wherever they are. And, check out our webpage, Phenomenoumena.com. What about using this? Can we use this?
Yeah, I think maybe we should use this.